You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. I think that it's important for you to look at how you got to where you are with different labels and to consider, when will you know it's time to let go of that label? Or what happens if you give yourself permission to live outside that label? And maybe that means stepping in or dipping your toe into a label that you're not familiar with. Maybe one that you're a little scared of, maybe one that you're not sure you could fit into, maybe you're sure it's one that you maybe don't align with. But what will you learn from doing that? You will learn something. Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today for a new episode of the A Bit From Within podcast. My name is Felicia, and I am your host. I am here as a certified astrologer and a self-love specialist, somebody who can help you with your personal transformation, especially with tools that promote mindfulness and self-love. Every week, I come here to share a little bit from within, something that is going on for me, something that is real, something that I'm working through. A lot of times, I do not have it all figured out, but I've got good questions and good suggestions. That is what I come here with, or at least what I try to come here with. And every week is just a little bit different. Last week, we were talking about setting boundaries and how to stand up for yourself. And this week, I'm diving into the topic of the labels we put on ourselves. And this one, I'm feeling a little nervous about getting into, honestly, because people get very triggered and up in arms about their labels. And so there's a part of me, I'm just going to be honest, that's a little bit afraid of ruffling feathers. But I think it's an important conversation to have, because there are so many of us walking around with these heavy labels and restrictions that we've put on ourselves. And sometimes they are labels that have served us in the past that are not serving us anymore, but that we are afraid of letting go of. Sometimes they're labels that we never even wanted to fully step into on our own, but we forced ourselves to, or those around us forced these labels onto ourselves, that we thought, okay, I guess I better be this person because I need acceptance, or because I need safety, or because I need to belong. And so this is a big subject, and I'm going to fully dive into it, and I'll share why I started thinking about this week and all of that. But first, we are going to dive into this week's astro check-in, because there is a lot happening astrologically that I just want you to be aware of and mindful of this week. So starting out on Sunday, October 23rd, the sun moved from Libra into Scorpio. So we are officially in Scorpio season. And this Scorpio season is starting off with a big bang, because we are heading right into the Scorpio new moon, which happens to be one of the solar eclipses that is happening this year. Solar eclipse in Scorpio. Now, a couple of things to note. It's important to remember that solar eclipses always happen in pairs. So we're having the first solar eclipse happening right now, and 2 weeks from now at the full moon, we're going to be having a lunar eclipse. These are both extremely powerful moons. So a eclipse is like a moon that's like amplified by like 4 or 5 times. It's so intense. And one of the things to note about eclipses is that they can bring big change in our life. So good things, bad things, things that we did not see before they arrived. And so this is not a great time for committing to things and setting intentions on things, or trying to manifest specific commitments or agreements. It's more about looking around and observing what is happening, where is the energy moving, and what is coming into your life, and also what's coming out of your life. Now, solar eclipses specifically are a little bit more known for things starting. So new opportunities, new change, doors opening, chapters beginning, opportunity. This is the idea with the new moon, is like the start of something new. While lunar eclipses, so what we have going on November 8th, that might be a little bit more traditionally symbolized by something ending, something coming to a close. But these things are working not only in the pair of what's happening this month, but this ongoing conversation that started back in April and May when there was a new moon in Taurus and a solar eclipse in Taurus, the beginning, and then the endings, the lunar eclipse in Scorpio. So now we're having the opposite of that. We're having the solar eclipse in Scorpio, and we'll be having a lunar eclipse in Taurus. So this is an ongoing conversation. Now, I wrote about this a little bit in the introduction to this month's astrological self-care guide, which if you're a member of our Patreon page, you've already received this. Hopefully you've read it, and now you can hear me expand on this part a little bit more. But I want to talk more about this often used metaphor of doors opening and closing in our lives, because astrologers who talk about eclipses often say eclipses are times of doors opening and closing. Now, I love this analogy, and I have to remind you that it is more complicated than it seems, because we like to think of this idea that we come to an ending in our life, that door closes and then another one opens and you walk right through it. Like, that would be so nice. But the truth is, it's usually more complicated than that. I think back to, and you can do this too, think back to something big that ended in your life. And was it just a clean cut, like no looking back type of ending? And did something begin right away? Usually, for me in my life, there's been a lot more of a gray area. And I think about the last big breakup that I had back in 2016. That was a very, very difficult breakup. That door closed so fast that I didn't even know it was coming. It shocked me. And I stood at that door that was closed for a long time. And I looked at that door and I thought, is it going to creak back open? If I wait patiently enough, if I dress pretty enough, can I game this to have this door open up again? I wasn't even really looking for other doors to open. I mean, I might have done a quick head swivel to be like, what the heck is going on right here? But I was still pretty focused on that door. And it took me a long time to get over that breakup. And to move on and to open my heart to something new. In fact, about 6 months after that breakup, I was still not really over it. And I remember I went and saw a Vedic astrologer who also sells mala beads. And I said to her, I need something to help heal a broken heart. Like, I am still distraught. I can't get over it. And so I actually made a mala with the beads that she recommended. And it was the week that I finished making that mala is the week that I actually started really starting to form a deeper friendship with my now partner, Dave. So I think that, the universe works in mysterious ways. But going back to my original point, doors open and close in a strange order. Sometimes a door opens before the other one closes. Sometimes two doors open at the same time and you have to decide which one you want to go through. Sometimes doors slam close just as much as they, fly open. Sometimes you are trying to force a door closed that doesn't want to close. Same thing with the opening, it's so often that our egos, that we think we have so much control and power to wield in our lives. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes it is up to us to make that decision that we're going to end something in our life and to begin something again. And so that can be a part of the piece, but we also have to be aware of where we are trying to control outcomes that are maybe not actually in alignment. We're trying to force things that aren't working. And that's where I think, especially at this time of year, this is a really good time to actually put your hands up and surrender. I always think of that as I'm sitting here recording because I'm sitting up in a nice, comfortable, easy seat. And I just think if I were to body surrender in my body, I just put my hands up, like palms forward, surrender, right? Your heart is open. You could also think of putting your hands on your chest, but I like this slightly more vulnerable option. But you can think of surrender in your body and practice this week. So get into a child's pose. Let yourself reach those arms out. Let your heart melt towards the floor. You can lay on your back and put your legs up the wall and just have your arms open next to your body, palms face up, or just flat on the floor even. Practicing surrender and getting really quiet during this time and putting your observer mind on. What are you noticing around you? This is one of the most powerful things that I think you can do. And of course, we do have, some Scorpio themes that are going to be happening specifically at this solar eclipse. So what does that look like? Well, the areas of change are like the themes that might be specifically at a changing point might be around power dynamics. Who has power and who doesn't? Also around money. So Scorpio often is a sign of shared resources. So this could be inheritances. This could be the family money, or the resources of the people around you, or possibly like investments and things like that. It could also be just about expenses and where your money is going. You might notice the theme of intimate relationships and partnerships coming up right now, how you feel understood, how you want to be seen, and how you see those that you are intimate with, even especially around possibly like sex and intimate relations. And then, of course, Scorpio is a sign of transformation. So if you've been doing some self-work, expect that to be at play right now. And I know a lot of you are. This season in particular, Scorpio themes might be around allowing yourself to move through a transformation. How are you changing? The emotional patterns that you've existed in, maybe those are shifting right now. And the last thing I'll say about this is that this is all happening in the water sign of Scorpio. So you might be feeling pretty emotional about this. So if you feel some big emotions coming up, that is okay. Here's your reminder that it's okay. And, if you are a water sign, so especially if you're a Scorpio, you might be feeling this pretty strong, or if you're born right at the end of Libra, since we're so close to the cusp right now, you might be feeling a lot of this stuff extra strong. Another thing is if you are another water sign, so if you are a Pisces or a Cancer, you might be feeling this. And then depending on your exact birth chart, like the degrees, if you were born towards the beginning of other fixed sign months, so Taurus, Leo, or Aquarius, those are the places you might be feeling it extra strong right now. But honestly, eclipse energy is there. It's happening right now, depending on what's happening in your own personal astrological chart, or just in your life right now. Like you might just be feeling a lot of change in the air. After all, it is autumn. We are in the thick of fall. It's been a gorgeous fall here in Colorado. I've been absolutely loving every second of how long this fall season has lasted, how the colors are turning, how it's been. I've had a lot of long drives lately where I've been able to just look at the mountains on the Front Range and see all of the colors kind of in front of them. And it's just been so special, so spectacular. And so I hope that, remember that fall is in the air. Change is in the air. The weather's starting to really change. I had to wear my scarf when I was out and about today. It's just that like little nip in the air. And change is okay. Even though it is a challenge for so many of us, it changes easier when you slow down. So let that be kind of your reminder in your container as you move through this week, this solar eclipse. And then next week on the podcast, I'll talk a little bit more about some Scorpio self-care ideas. If you need a preview this week, one of the best things you can do for Scorpio self-care is take a bath. That's just my go-to water self-care activity. All right, you guys, let's take a quick break and then let's come back and let's have the conversation around labels. So there are a lot of reasons that I have been thinking about labels, the labels we put on ourselves. In fact, I have been listening to Yoga Girl. She's a podcaster and a yoga teacher and just a really cool human. She was really big on Instagram right when Instagram started, and my mom had actually heard of her first through Instagram, and then she said, you should check out this girl. I think you'd really like her. I started listening to her podcast right from her first ever podcast episode. Gosh, I don't even remember when that was. It must have been like 4 or 5 years ago, I think, because it was when her daughter was born, and I think her daughter's 5 now. So I've been listening to her and kind of following her life off and on for a while. Her podcast is a big inspiration of why I wanted to have my own podcast to share a little bit of what was going on inside of me. And so this week on her podcast, and I don't listen every week. In fact, I just got a new phone, and so my podcasts have been all reset and not in their normal order. So I haven't listened to her podcast in a couple months, but I saw a post of hers on Instagram that said a big announcement. I am no longer a vegan. And she's like, I'm talking about this in my podcast episode, and I knew I had to tune in because, Yoga Girl, so she goes by Yoga Girl as a name, but really her name is Rachel Brathen. Rachel has been a vegan for over a decade, and she's had a lot of health issues. And I mean, you can go check out her podcast. It's called Conversations from the Heart, a Yoga Girl podcast. But she has been a vegan for a very long time, and she talks about this in the podcast where she explains all of the reasoning and everything. But she was talking about how, she wasn't just a vegan as a personal choice, and how when you are vegan and that's your preferred diet, you step into this label of I am a vegan. It is your identity. And over the past, 5-6 years, she's been having some really significant health problems that, as she would go and try to work this out with doctors, they would ask her, hey, are you open to incorporating some animal products into your diet? And she would just absolutely lose it. How dare you ask me that? Because she was wearing this label so strongly. She believed so firmly in the principles of being a vegan and no harm towards animals, all of these things. And so basically the health problems kept getting worse and worse. And so, I honestly, if this subject is interesting to you, I highly recommend checking out her podcast episode on this. But long story short, for health reasons, she has taken that label off of herself and stepped into not labeling herself and eating what feels best in her body. And I just, for so many reasons, I find this just absolutely fascinating. And there's so much that I want to say about it. I'm really trying to focus my thoughts on this. For me personally, and I'm sure that I have plenty of labels that I've put on myself, but I feel like I have been saturated in worlds where specific labels are very important. So talking about, yoga. In the yoga community, being vegan is seen as an upper echelon of being a fantastic yogi. Oh, you don't eat meat, you walk barefoot around. There's all these stereotypes. And sometimes in the yoga community, there are these narratives around what labels you put on yourself and the identity that you have. And if you wear certain things, then you are basically a more enlightened or a better person than somebody who does not fully commit to those identities. And that was something that I was kind of curious about. In fact, when I was in my yoga teacher training, I had decided to become vegetarian. And I was vegetarian for, I'm trying to remember when I stopped being a vegetarian. I think that I became a vegetarian for like maybe 2 years right after I graduated yoga teacher training in 2016. And it was in like beginning of June that I became a vegetarian. And it was something that was a cool experience for me to move through. My sister has been a vegetarian since she was 10. And so it was something that like kind of bonded me with her. And it was something that I wanted to try for myself. I think there's a lot of interesting things about just having parameters in your life and giving yourself restrictions that will teach you a lot about self-discipline. So that was a cool way to do that. But truly, I didn't feel great myself as a vegetarian. I had a lot of digestive issues as a vegetarian, and I didn't always feel very energized. And so I did start incorporating fish into my diet for probably like the last year, where I was eating a lot of like shrimp and salmon, and that helped quite a bit. And then eventually I transitioned away from that, and it was fine. And I never, even when I was a vegetarian, and it was kind of linked to my period of becoming a yoga teacher, it wasn't something that I wanted to step into this yogi label. In fact, I've always kind of wrestled with feeling like, oh, I'm a yogi, or I'm a yoga teacher. I've struggled putting that label on myself, even though I love teaching the practice of yoga, and I still teach gentle yoga through the Patreon. Because I don't love the label, and I think that sometimes there are just as many, negative parts of certain labels. And I always want to kind of steer away from that as much as possible, because I just want to authentically be myself. And I felt that way as a photographer too. Talk about another world where there's a lot of labels. Now, this one's a totally different kind of situation. There's less stereotypes as a photographer. But, I would very easily get swept away into that like boss babe stereotype that's happening right now. Like, oh, you own your own business, you're a woman, that's incredible, like you make your own money, you're a photographer. And then all of the stereotypes that come with that, like, oh, you just take pictures for fun, like your whole life is just so creative, like being a photographer is so easy, you get to make your own schedule, or you work for yourself, so you're always available whenever I need you. Like, that's definitely something that people think about you based on your label. People are going to think things about you based on your labels. That's what this comes down to. And then just while I'm talking about these worlds that I've really met these labels with, I grew up going to a Christian school and being in a very Christian environment, belonging to multiple different kinds of churches. I had experience with the Lutheran Church. I had a big experience with the Church of Christ. And then I also had a lot of experience with the Orthodox Christian Church. And, those were the churches that my parents brought me to. There was a totally different idea of being a Christian that came from my school, which was, honestly, this is bad, but I can't remember if it was more Baptist or if it was just more evangelical. I can't remember, but it was this whole other kind of programming around the kind of labels that you need to abide by. And now this is where it gets really interesting, because labels in themselves are not a bad thing. Labels create limits. And there are times in our lives where a label gives us permission to embody who we are and what we're working on. For example, if you have always been somebody who is really shy and who did not do well in public and social situations, and you finally learn the word introvert for the first time, you are probably loving that label. You are like, yes, that is what I am. I am an introvert. So when somebody asks me if I can go to a big concert with them, I can explain to them, I'm really introverted. That's probably not the best place for us to spend time together. And you feel that like it's very easy to explain to somebody else because they have an understanding of what your limits are based on your label. Same thing goes with being a vegan in that way, right? Like you're out and about in the world, you're at a dinner party, somebody's trying to serve you food or whatever, you can explain to them, I'm vegan. And that instantly, they know what that is. They understand that you don't consume animal products. So hopefully they respect that about you. But there comes a point, and again, I don't have all the answers on this, but what I've been thinking about, a little bit of what I've been wrestling with, is that I feel like there comes a point with, I'm going to say most labels, that they stop giving us this permission and this safety, these safety limits, and they instead start to restrict us and apply pressure to who we are. Pressure to stay the same and to never be able to grow outside of those limits. They limit us, which at first is a good thing and eventually becomes a bad thing. Maybe not for every label, but let's just say that that is a possibility, that a label can become a bad thing. Think about the labels that you assume are bad. I'm going to pause and hold that pause for a second because I want you to picture right now, let's just be really honest with ourselves. What are some immediate labels that you identify? And you can go do this a 2-for-1. What labels are good and what labels are bad? And again, these might not even be wrong. They might align with your values. They probably do because they are the first things you're thinking of. Some easy ones are oh, my religion, good. Other religions, maybe not so good. Or maybe you're more neutral about that. That's also another category. For me, people who are addicts, that's not such a good thing. So addicts, bad. People who are good with money, that's a really good thing. Ooh, people who are bad with money, that's a bad thing. Or what about politics, right? If you haven't already thought of liberal is in this category, conservative in this category. I will be shocked if you haven't already thought that before I brought it up, because it is so easy, especially in our day and age, to assume that certain values and political leanings and ideologies fall into a certain category, and the opposite is not just somebody who doesn't agree with you, but somebody who is the exact opposite of you when it comes to being a good person or a bad person. Or maybe you just would say a lost person or somebody who's crazy, right? And again, I'm not telling you which of those things I necessarily agree with, but we can be honest and say that those labels have such a jarring dynamic in our lives. Friendships have been lost over these labels, and conversations that are so important to be had are not being had because our labels make us so defensive. Isn't that a crazy thing? Now, I can speak to this personally because ever since 2020, I've been living this out in different areas of my life. Back in 2020, I was going it felt like round after round with a really important family member who, I don't want to say that I strongly disagree with their exact views, but I disagreed so strongly with how they were presenting those views and how close-minded and rigid and intense they were about how they presented themselves and the things that they were saying about other people. And I've learned this about myself because for me, that feeling has also come up with my partner. Again, not even necessarily disagreeing with what he's saying, but disagreeing with how he's saying it. And I've noticed myself really, really have to work through and finding myself grounded and not letting myself get swept away in the emotions around it, because it is so easy to jump into defensiveness and, being sarcastic or cutting people off and assuming you know what they're saying and all of these things. Like, this is what happens specifically around the labels of politics and the labels that have to do with different political issues that are hot button topics. And again, I have a lot of experience with this because I grew up being trained to have these conversations, to be in these kind of disagreements with people and like how to present it in a way that would get them to see that you were right and that they were wrong. That there was no difference of opinion. It was just there was the right side and then there's the wrong side. Now, I'm not saying that all Christian affiliations do that, but I think that that is still a very common thing. And I think that's common not just in Christianity, but it's common in specific points of view of any big label, right? It can be like that with vegans. They could be so obstinate and so, literally, this is a really big thing in the vegan community. And I was actually really glad that Rachel, who's Yoga Girl, talked about this, that like plant-based meat options, like all of the Beyond Meat stuff, that is highly, highly processed. It is disgusting for you. In fact, one of the functional medicine doctors that Dave is working with actually said that they wouldn't even feed that to their dog. It is so terrible for you. It is horrible for you. And yet it is selling off the shelves at the grocery store because people think being plant-based means that you are healthy. And I think this is a really good example of a place that I just want to open your point of view to this, to take a look at the things that you've been taught by society, by family, by the world that is around you. What are the labels that the world is telling you is good? Plant-based is healthy. Oh, okay. If it's plant-based, it's healthy. Then I can pick blank. You're not even thinking of looking at the ingredients. You're not thinking to push back on that. Well, what does healthy mean? Right? Maybe you have, but it would be easy and understandable if you didn't. I've been there before too. In every single one of these categories, I want you to know that there's a part of me that didn't ask questions because I want to align myself with what feels good, who is good, and honestly, this sounds bad, but like, what is the ideal right now of a person who is a good person, who is a trustworthy person, who is somebody that is helping others and benefiting society. And I think when it comes to health, we need to ask questions. When it comes to astrology, we need to ask questions. I think about this all the time when I'm on like TikTok or when I'm on Pinterest, because on Pinterest I do a lot of my astrological stuff and I'm posting a lot about the moon and different astrology things. I also have a kind of like curated list that comes to me that's also very similar content. And I see people all of the time creating these graphics around like the 8 phases of the moon. And I'll read through them and I'm like, this person has never worked with the lunar cycle in their entire life. They also don't know anything about what's happening astrologically at a first quarter moon. They don't know. I can tell based on the description. And yet, is that landing in the hands of somebody who's just going to believe it for whatever reason? Yes. This also happened. Again, I love Pinterest. I think it's an amazing tool. But no matter what, especially on social media, you have to question the information that you're getting. And does that suck? Yeah, it really does. Does it suck to have to do that with your news sources? Yeah, it's not fun. It'd be much better and easier and more convenient if we could just say, oh, this is a place that I trust and all of the information that I get from this place will always be a true thing. Great. Like, that would be amazing. Is that realistic? Let's be honest. Let's just be honest. It's probably not true. For example, on Pinterest, when Dave in January needed to go on a low histamine diet, I started researching like crazy, okay, what are some different low histamine options? And it's so funny that, just as a total side tangent, I was so obsessed for him, finding different low histamine recipes because that's what I would have needed. I would have needed the variety. He's not like that. He could literally, when he is focused and disciplined, he could literally eat meat and a veggie or meat and a potato for every single meal for, weeks on end and not care and not get bored. I'm not like that. I need different inspiration. I need to try different things. I need to keep it full of variety. I need to keep it interesting. So I was on Pinterest and I was looking up low histamine recipes. Now, I found some excellent articles on Pinterest that helped me understand so much about low histamine food and the important things that you need to do when you're on a low histamine diet. For example, histamine is increased in leftovers. And so if you are you basically can't batch cook any of your low histamine meals. Every meal has to be made and eaten or made and frozen because just sitting in the fridge, it creates histamine. So things like that, I would never have known that unless somebody created this really deep dive, and you can tell by the amount of research and the way that they explain it that it's accurate. I also found so many recipes that would say really big on the front, low histamine French onion soup. And then I'd read the article and I'd be like, okay, cool. I'm going to try this recipe. And I'd jump down to the ingredients and 4 of the ingredients are completely high in histamine. And it made me so mad because how many people out there were told by their doctor, okay, you need to eat. Probably nobody is learning this from their PCP, but say they were told somehow, try a low histamine diet. They go to Pinterest, they get this recipe, they try this, they think, well, this is a low histamine recipe. They have no idea what foods are histamine inducing and which ones aren't. And this is where it gets complicated, because if you are going to live a life where you are open to understanding how you move through the world and what feels best for you and trying to do your best, you are also going to have to slow down and be willing to do the research. And it is so hard to do that, in my opinion. I'm just going to be as blunt as possible about that. It is something that I struggle with and where I really get kind of frustrated sometimes because I don't feel like I have the time or the mental bandwidth to sort through all of the bullshit that is out there. That's how I really feel. There is so much bullshit out there, and you have to, wonder, is this a trusted source? Is this a recent source? How much work has it done to it? What are they comparing it to? Is there a money-motivated reason that somebody might be saying this way? And honestly, that is one of the biggest things that you have to keep in mind is there are, and I'm not going to name them because I'm not brave enough, but there are so many things out there that are being packaged as the right thing to do from a internal point of view. Good people allow these things to happen. And the reason behind those things are actually huge money makers in the pharmaceutical industry, in the hospital industry, in the medical industry, in government, in politics, in big corporations. Everywhere you look where people have a room to make money, there are things that you should probably be questioning that you might not be because you just assume like, well, if I'm a good person, then I should get behind this. So all of that being said, if you're still with me, if you're still listening to this, I'm going to give you the invitation that I'm giving to myself right now. What does it look like to try on labels that you're not familiar with? Just sit with that for a second. In the area of my life that I'm doing this, it actually has to do with femininity and masculinity. Now, don't get me wrong. I have always presented myself and felt like a feminine female. And it goes without saying, there's nothing wrong if I was not that way, if I felt like I was a more masculine female. But I have always felt like a feminine female. And I have, since I was a teenager, always struggled with my femininity. I really have. Yes, I am a very creative and intuitive person, and I think that those are both qualities that fall into that feminine category, especially for females. I'm very empathetic and very caring, and I feel that way. But I also have these parts to how I behave that show up very masculine. And again, I'm not judging this as good or bad. I'm just saying that I have carried this label that like, I am a female who gets shit done. I am a female who can do anything that needs to happen. I can fix a toilet. I can fix my car. I can hang some shelves. Where I do struggle physically is with strength. So sometimes I need some outside help for things that you literally have to be really strong for. But I also have this kind of masculine way of moving through the world where like, I can't relax. I can't stop doing. Like I am always on the go. I'm always looking for the next project. And I'm not saying that like masculine men are like this, but I do think that masculinity in females can show up in that way of being like always having the next project, being really reliable, constantly, like if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And you don't even tune in to yourself and find out, well, what is going on for me right now? You're like, well, I just said I was going to do this, so I'm going to follow through with it. Like that is a more masculine expression of energy. And it's funny because Dave and I were talking about this recently, and I told him, I'm like, it's interesting to see like what would have happened if I would have been, let's say, like right out of college, fallen in love with somebody who was like, I've got a great job and I'm going to take care of you. And like, you can just go be an artist. Like you can be, I had gone to theater school. So like, what if I was just allowed to step into that female side of myself and I didn't have to be my own provider? But that wasn't an option. I wasn't with anybody. I had no prospects, right? Like it's like Pride and Prejudice. Like I had no prospects. And so I had to figure out how to provide for myself. And so when you have to become your own provider, you have to connect with your masculine energy. You do, as a female. And so I think that especially being a person who values security and stability, I really stepped into that more masculine energy for myself and started to make part of that my identity. I never called it masculine. I just thought of it as like being a boss babe, as being a business owner, as a person who's super reliable, as somebody who's super honest. There's a lot of different words that I associated with that and thought, this is who I am. There is no give or take here. There's no other way for me to be. And over this last year, as I have made steps to change my career and to shift more towards, I think, what is actually in better alignment with myself, and honestly, with the goal of stepping towards motherhood, I have really started to slow down and really take a look at some of the ways that masculine versus feminine energy shows up in my life. Now, I want to be really clear here, like if I haven't been clear, that there is nothing wrong about any of these categories. There's nothing wrong with me being, if I were a more masculine female. There would be absolutely nothing wrong with that. Same thing on the opposite side. There can be males who are more feminine, and this is a very fluid thing right now. I am 1,000% open to that. I am not judging it in any way. But this is where I think it's important for us to be willing to look at the labels we put on ourselves and also be willing to understand how we got there and if that's where we only want ourselves to go forever. Because I happen to believe, and now I'm a person who values transformation, and I don't want the person that I am 3 years from now to be the same as the person as me sitting here talking to you. I hope that I continue to evolve and to grow and to open my mind and to open my heart and to have the world shape my experiences as well. So that being said, of course, it makes sense that I think that it's important for you to look at how you got to where you are with different labels and to consider, when will you know it's time to let go of that label? Or what happens if you give yourself permission to live outside that label? And maybe that means stepping in or dipping your toe into a label that you're not familiar with. Maybe one that you're a little scared of, maybe one that you're not sure you could fit into, maybe you're sure not, it's one that you maybe don't align with. But what will you learn from doing that? You will learn something. And it's funny because I have so many friends and people in my community who have done this work of stripping off a label that they felt was their entire identity and seeing who they've become and how they discuss things now and how they are able to understand that more exists. And I feel like that is an incredible experience for people to go through. And it is one that on whatever level that you feel comfortable with, whether it's health and nutrition, or whether it's political, or whether it is energetic, or whether it is, I don't know, the kind of movie you watch. I hope that you give yourself the invitation to open your mind and to see what's there on the other side. And even if it's just being less defensive when you're talking to somebody that you don't agree with, maybe that's more than enough. I think we would all be better for this, personally. You can, of course, let me know how this influences you right now, what it makes you think of, what it brings up for you, the aha moments, that a bit from within that this made you think of. I would love to know those insights, especially on this topic, because it is a big topic and it is one that does bring up a lot of feelings because labels have to do with our identity. So I get it. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I think I have shared, probably could have shared more, but I do think I stirred the pot enough. I don't know. You guys tell me. Let's go ahead and do a card drawing. I think it's time to use the Wild Unknown Animal Spirit deck. If you are new around here, we end every single podcast episode with a card drawing, a way for the universe to contribute to today's conversation. So I'm going to give these cards a quick shuffle. Take a nice deep breath here. You can breathe with me too. Okay, so this is the fish card, which represents restlessness, change of focus, and being lost in the current. The fish loves to be subsumed in life's current. Nothing pleases it more than movement, and more movement. The roaming lifestyle of the fish may be exhilarating for a while, but usually leads to weariness and slippery relationships. With all the possibilities out there in the vast waters, the fish becomes lost without clear goals and intentions. Spend some time with the lunar forces, dear fish, as the peace and calm of the moon will soothe your soul. It's beautiful. I feel like it connects both with the eclipses we're moving through right now, and then also just this entire conversation around labels. And I think it's ironic that it says the peace and the calm of the moon soothe your soul, because the moon is always changing. It is always changing. So let the fish be your guide this week. Maybe you will see fish. You can let me know if you do. All right, you guys, with that, I will leave you to it. If you do want to check out this month's astrological self-care guide, you can join our Patreon as a podcast level member. So $3 a month, you get the monthly self-care guide, and then you get all ad-free episodes of the podcast. So if you are not already a member, please consider supporting this work. And of course, if you are already a member, thank you so much. I love our Patreon community. You guys are all absolutely wonderful, and I appreciate the community more than I can say. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, and until next time.